because you after the French Revolution, you ended up with the massive guillotine, the wave of guillotines in the 1790s, and then you had Napoleon, and you had a lot of chaos. But I think it's fair to say that long term, it was absolutely a net positive because without
Yeah.
it, without the French Revolution, you wouldn't have had the wave of Republican slash democratic movements that swept through Europe in the 19th century, which also eventually translated into the British Empire, also kind of democratizing
Yeah.
itself. And if all of that had not happened, today there would be no America. Not big. I know that the American War of Independence took place before the French Revolution, but I
And
don't
yeah,
think America would have been able to survive that much longer if there was a hostile absolutist Europe that was just waiting for its moment to go back and eat off the crumbs.
buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 323. I'm talking to Alexandre Crevaux. He is with the International Alliance of Libertarian Parties. He's also from France. He's lived in other European countries. He's currently in Canada right now. He sounds like a well-traveled guy, so he knows a lot of people. And I wanted to talk to him really about what's been going on in France for the last couple of years. We might talk more about the IALP too.
Mhm.
How are you, Alexandre?
Hi, how are you? It's really an honor to be on your show.
Thank you. Yes, I'm glad you're. Yeah, this is the first time I've recorded 4 shows in a day too, so I'll probably be a week editing them. But anyway, I talk too much about how the sausage is made, but anyway, full transparency. So anyway, so first of all, how'd you get into libertarian politics?
That's a good question. So I used to live in the United States,
Oh,
and fresh out of high school, I mean, already back in high school, I was a dedicated libertarian, inspired by Ron Paul and everything. And fresh out of high school, I decided to volunteer for the Gary Johnson presidential campaign in back in 2012. Back in 2012, yeah. And I ended up staying on board with the libertarian movement even after the presidential election. I volunteered in my local Libertarian Party affiliate in Miami, and rapidly I started taking over campaign management, because as someone who was from Europe, I also knew the way Europeans were handling their political campaigns. So it's always good to have an international perspective on how to run campaigns because you can be more creative. And I used those tactics, and I consider my libertarian career in the US to have been very productive. I got 12 Libertarian Party members elected in Miami in local government positions, and in the state of Florida, 24. All that by the age of 24, actually. I like that number. It's 24 by 24. I also helped with the Libertarian Party of Florida organize something called Operation First Step back then in the 2018 election cycle. And I was very dedicated to targeting local seats where we knew that there were high levels of vacancies. So not, not your state house race or not your state senate race or not even county commission or something like that, but something smaller, something like a community development district or special taxing district or a mosquito control board or whatever. Those districts where we knew that there was on average 70% vacancy rates because no one even bothered to file. We got libertarians, we identified libertarians in those districts. We went, knocked on their doors or called their numbers or whatever, and we asked them to run, and they ran, and we got 24 people elected the first year we tried it. But the same year after, in 2018, I moved to the Republic of Georgia, where I worked as a diplomatic advisor to the president of Georgia, President Salome Zurabishvili, all the way up to 2023 when I resigned. And well, long story short, now currently I am still active in politics in Georgia, but also in France, and I'm assisting diplomatically. I'm assisting Stephen Ikaila, who's the new chairman of the U.S. Libertarian Party, with reorganizing the IALP, the International Alliance of Libertarian Parties.
Yes, yeah, you've been in, as I like to call it, Sakkart Velo. This is the country that has a capital of Tbilisi. It's in the Caucasus Mountains. This is not as not this place has nothing to do with Atlanta. So yes, it's a wonderful little country, and I highly recommend you go visit there. They have their own unique alphabet, and just like their
Mm.
neighbor
Not
Armenia
right
also
now.
has their own
Not
unique.
right now, though.
Yes, it's a beautiful country, so definitely go visit there. So anyway, yes, the International Alliance for Libertarian Parties. What can you tell me about that?
Sure. Well, so the International Alliance of Libertarian Parties is a group that was formed back in 2015. It's actually not really a revolutionary idea because most political parties, established political parties in the world, belong to large global families of political parties. For example, the Republican Party in the United States is a member of what we call IDU, the International Democratic Union, which is the global alliance of conservative and center right parties. You have other global international political party alliances like the Socialist International for left wing parties, Liberal International for centrist parties. And in 2015, some libertarian parties around the world, namely uh, the United States, France, Spain, the UK, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and a couple others, got together in the United Kingdom and signed a declaration forming that international alliance. It's a great idea because there is no mechanism to help, you know, new libertarian movements grow around the world. You don't have anyone that's helping out young libertarians in Tunisia or in Qatar or, in Malta or anywhere around the world organize themselves into a political party. And an organization like the IELP is great for that. It's also great because libertarians, when they're isolated, like just in America or just in France or just in one country, they tend to forget that the world is big. They tend to forget that there are global challenges that everyone must be ready for, whether it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine or whether it's developments between Iran and Israel or whatever it is. There needs to be a libertarian position that's not developed just from the US perspective, but from a global libertarian perspective. What what does peace mean? What is the actual libertarian solution? What should a libertarian not in Nebraska, but rather, in Israel, how should they react? That kind of stuff. All of that is extremely important, and that's what the IELP's purpose is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some, sometimes you have these disagreements here. I mean, for example, if there's a war between uh, Tanzania and Kenya, most American libertarians are saying we just might as well stay out of it. But the libertarians in Kenya will probably say, well, we got to defend our country.
Hmm.
And maybe the
Yeah.
libertarians in Tanzania will say the same thing. We've got to defend our country. So I think that is
Well,
where there are some differences that come up.
Well,
Uh,
well, Chris, if you don't mind, just quickly adding to that, I think it's important to understand that it's one thing to be anti-imperialist, and I think it's a beautiful thing about America that it's the only great empire in the history of humanity where its own population is against imperialism, and that's something that history needs to remember down the line. But also, it's extremely important to realize that there has to be a difference between anti-imperialism and supporting things like genocide or enemies
yeah.
of freedom around the world. It's understandable that you don't want to send troops on the ground in Ukraine when you're the United States, but to, publicly, fly the Russian flag like some libertarians have done, and, to parrot Putin's talking points without realizing that they're just parts of a hybrid war that's going on against the American public. It's just, there has to be a red line somewhere. And that's what a lot of libertarians in the United States don't understand, I fear. Also, one last thing, a libertarian answer to the war in Ukraine is not blocking military aid because Ukrainians right now are not asking for money from the United States. They're asking for the right to buy weapons. And so a libertarian position should be, let's allow military companies in the United States to do business with Ukraine without government regulation. Saying no to that means that the government needs to come in and tell these military companies to not manufacture anything for Ukraine, which isn't really a libertarian position.
That's true. So anyway, so yeah, you've also when was the last time you lived in France?
Uh, well, I mean, I moved out of France when I was, a teenager, but the
Okay.
last 4 years or so, I've been, I've spent several months of the year in France because politics in Georgia is intrinsically linked to that of Europe.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah. So what's been going on in France? I hear some people, say France has fallen. I don't know if you follow that Eva, that Dutch girl Eva. I remember she once said France has fallen. You know who I mean? Eva, is it?
yeah. Yeah, yeah, I know who you're talking about. The thing is, France is a country that's already so historical and so important, and people in France themselves, they're so, confident in the future of the country. No one really cares about the sensationalist, big words that we hear. People like Eva, they come and go. They have their minute of fame on X and on social media because they've managed to learn a little bit about the algorithms that things like TikTok uses, but the reality is very different. Whatever is going on in France is not anything different than that's what's been happening, since World War II in France. And
Well,
that's that there are very big movements that are very passionate about the country's future on all sides of the aisle. And there's big protest movements because in France, protesting always works. It always works. We might not think because no, protesting isn't always about overthrowing a government. Sometimes it's about making your voice heard over a reform project, and they always work, even if it means that something slightly changes in a potential reform project. That's already a victory for a lot of these protest movements. So, ultimately, what's been going on in France, I'll tell you, is the same as usual.
yeah, yeah. That there is a lot of truth to that. I think the French do like to protest,
Yeah, we're
which
proud
is
of that.
if it's and if it's mostly peaceful, it's not really a bad thing. I can think back, to some of the French protests in 1968 or the protests against the coronavirus nonsense. But I'm also hearing, for example, there's a lot of scaremongering about immigrants going on, and I'm really trying to get the question
Hmm.
how much of this is true and how much of it is it just
Hmm.
trying to scare people.
Well, this it's definitely a little bit of both. Let's say there is, and I think that's something that we gotta understand that yes, it's normal that massive immigration, can be considered a national security issue, especially in a country like France, where you have massive populations coming from North Africa, especially from Algeria, that deeply inside of them they carry an anti-French sentiment, which you can try to understand the philosophy of it because they dislike they grew up in a totalitarian regime in Algeria that taught them that France is evil. Also, France itself has had a very difficult past in Algeria itself. So growing up in that, it's understandable that they have a certain anti-French sentiment. The problem is that they come to France carrying that sentiment because France is a free country and isn't vetting, the political soul of someone that comes in. So they use that system, and they go around and they burn the French flag, and they do things like that, and that's definitely problematic. It's something that needs to be addressed. But right now, honestly, if you're going to be a constitutional republic in France, there's very little more than you can do compared to what's being done right now. I mean, the asylum cases have been going down because the processes take a lot less time than before. And that was always a big problem in France. They're trying to curtail family reunions. They're trying to make quotas to implement quotas on new arrivals, things like that. More than that, I mean, well, France is not going to open concentration camps, right? I mean, France is a constitutional republic with its laws and with its proper system, and so there's very little more than it can do. But there's not an invasion happening.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. So, I mean, what is the situation in most European countries with regard to self-defense? I mean, I hear a lot about crime and rioting and sometimes
Yeah.
rape and other things like that, but I mean, it's pretty much in most European countries, the peaceful citizens are not allowed to defend themselves. Is that correct?
Well, that's a bit of a okay, so there are very strict gun laws in France, if that's what you're
Yes.
implying. And they just recently passed a bill. The far left, got together with some people in the center, and they passed a bill to ban the purchase of certain sharp knives to minors. But overall, that's
Yeah.
it's not a debate, and that is something that is so crucial that I think every American needs to understand, that things that are traditionally debates in America are not as relevant in on the other side of the Atlantic. And it creates a lot of talking points because, it's very easy today. The global media is very, integrated with each other, but really there is no gun debate in in France. Now, there's a lot of school violence in France. We got to be honest about it. There's a lot of school
Yeah.
violence. I don't know how it compares to U.S. School shootings. I'm willing to bet that there's a lot more violence in American schools, but there is still a lot of violence in French schools. Violence targeted at teachers, violence targeted at fellow students. And what's the answer to that? It has to be. It's difficult. It's difficult to say. You can't just say, give guns to all the kids and that'll solve it. That's not really a solution. It's a very much more complicated situation that actually has a lot to do with immigration as well.
Well, I don't I believe that, everybody has free will.
Hmm.
You're not forced to be a criminal because you're an immigrant. You're not forced to be an immigrant because of your skin color. You actually are a moral agent. And if we don't believe that our citizens are moral agents, then the whole concept of liberty goes out the door anyway. Freedom is
Hmm.
based on the fact that we're volitional creatures and that we can make choices.
Sure.
So so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm not
you know,
saying that criminals are that too bad that they criminals
yeah,
because of a background or something. No, no, no. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying though that in any situation, I mean, I mean, you're American. How many times have you heard yourself? And I'm sure that a lot of people on the American libertarian side have also used that plenty of times. It's not a gun issue; it's a mental health issue, right? They say that all the time, which kind of implies that okay, we're not gonna touch
yeah,
guns, but then that means that we're gonna talk about mental health issues. So you
yeah.
are talking about a background issue anyways, right?
Well, mental health. I mean, yes, but I don't believe that criminality is genetic. Now, now
No, no, it's not.
we
It's
haven't really
not. It's
studied
not. But
that, but this whole I mean, I think, I don't know what it's like, but I think in America, above all, we have a crisis of many young men growing up without fathers around.
sure,
So,
absolutely. That's
and
a
again,
that's
that's
definitely
something
a
that
problem.
again, that's a product of decisions that people made. You know, women who get
Yeah.
with irresponsible men, men who make babies and make tracks. Those are all things that are products of choices that didn't have to be made.
It's not a choice the kid made though.
Yeah, it's not a choice the kid makes. That's yes, I know. I'm well aware of that, but we're still and of course we're also creating of course we also have a very anti-father, anti-male society which says that fathers are useless, which doesn't help things either. I don't think it's that bad in France personally.
It's not.
France
It's
does
not.
yeah, France doesn't it's
We in
especially
France we
when you consider
understand very much the need for a united family,
yeah,
and that has not been an issue, and we don't really have any of those problems. We don't have a large part of our population that's growing up fatherless, which is the case in America. And yeah, that we have different
yeah,
types of problems. If in America the lack of fathers in a part of the population is the cause for a lot of the crime. In France, it's also the fact that there's a huge part of the community, mostly immigrants, who grew up in very difficult societies that where they had to experience crime, where there was no education, where there's no critical thinking, where everything is still very primitive. And I'm not calling, Algeria as a nation primitive, but I am saying though that there is There are definitely some, issues in a lot of societies, and I've seen it all over the world. There's definitely some issues in societies that are very problematic, and when you take that and you mix it up with a more civilized part of the world, like Western Europe, it definitely causes problems.
So if they wanted to just turn France into Algeria, why did they come to France in the first place?
Well,
If
well,
they if they yeah, what's the serious question if you're gonna
sure.
I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
yeah,
that's a good question, and I agree with you. I agree with you. When you
I
go
I mean,
somewhere, when
and
you
what
move
yeah,
somewhere, you have to integrate, and that's been one of the biggest issues in France. And I think also it should be said that I don't believe immigration is a problem in France. I think the problem is that the fact that the state has prevented any type of integration. The state has removed any incentive for migrants to integrate. They've actually provided,
yes,
things from free housing over the years. And one of the biggest problems with that, by the way, is the fact that, when you have entire immigrant communities
yeah,
that are settled into small pockets of communities, then of course they're going to, form their own clans. Uh, you know, Being in one of those migrant complexes, you're not gonna feel like you're in France. If you're a woman there, your rights are not going to be protected. Police is going to stay far away from you and things like that. It's one thing that's very interesting
yes,
is when in Israel, when the state of Israel was formed, one thing that the Israeli government was very careful about is when people were moving, when Jews were going to Israel to move there, the government was actually making sure that people from the same parts of the world were not staying together. I know that from the Georgian
yes,
Jewish example, Georgian Jews were protesting against Golda Meir's government in Israel because they all wanted to live in the same, one or two villages. But
yeah,
then that creates some form of sectarianism, or like very tight groups, which is what happened in France, and which had been a very big problem, which has
yes.
been one of the main causes of crime.
So, would you have as many immigrants if they weren't being given all this free stuff?
That is a good question, and I think
Yeah,
that's a good question because
yeah,
you cannot definitely um forget the fact that most of these people that come to the developed world, they're trying to find a better life in general. And that better life isn't,
yes,
just free healthcare. That better life is just more peace for my kids,
but
more normal,
yeah.
like, more stability. And that's not necessarily welfare. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that.
I'm talking about free stuff as opposed to stuff. I do think that some immigrants come to America because they want a chance to earn a living and they
Mhm.
want to earn money to pay food. But again, if you have immigrant, but again, if you also have, but I'm talking about free stuff. I'm going to quote a Frenchman who I think
Mhm.
libertarians should read here, and this might surprise you who it is, but uh, quote. Wait, quote. Begone those virtues which produce naught but ingratitude. But, my charming friend, be not at all deceived. Benevolence is surely rather pride's vice than an authentic virtue in the soul. Never is it without the single intention of performing a good act, but instead ostentatiously that one aids one fellow man would be most annoyed were the alms one has just bestowed not to receive the utmost possible publicity. Nor, Eugenie, are you to imagine that, as is the popular view, that this action has only excellent consequences. For my part, I behold it as nothing other than the greatest of all duperies. It accustoms the poor man to doles which provoke the deterioration of his energy. When able to expect your charities, he ceases to work and becomes, when they fail him, a thief or assassin. On all sides, I hear them ask to suppress mendacity, and meanwhile they do everything possible to encourage it. Would you have no flies in your bedchamber? Don't spread about sugar to attract them into it. You wish to have no poor in France? Distribute no alms, and above all, shut down your port houses. The individual born in misfortune, thereupon seeing himself deprived of these dangerous crutches, will fend for himself, summoning up all the resources put in him by nature to extricate himself from the condition wherein he started life, and he will importune you no longer. End of quotation.
Mhm.
Do you know who said that?
No.
That's the Marquis de Sade, Philosophy in the
Oh.
Bedroom. I love it. Yeah, you
That
don't want to have flies in your chamber that don't. This is. You don't want to have. I mean, that that that's as
I
much
didn't know that part
anti-welfare
of
as I've
his,
ever seen anything.
political philosophy. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
well, I think I think it's a very theoretical framework, and we really don't have
yeah,
the ability to really, make a
yeah,
prediction if we're gonna be honest with ourselves. If I'm sorry, if you were
yeah,
to remove, all of our, all of the welfare mechanisms, would there be less migrants? I don't know. What I do know is if you were to
yeah,
remove all of these welfare mechanisms, whatever migrant community there would be in France would be a lot more integrated because they'd have
yeah,
to find jobs, they'd have to speak the language, they'd have to, find housing for themselves. They'd be a little bit more spread out around the country and not all, conglomerated in the suburbs of Paris. You
yeah.
would have hospitals overcrowded in Strasbourg and things like that. Yeah,
Okay.
it's something that needs to happen, regardless of whether it would lower the amount of immigrants or not.
Yeah, yeah, this is exactly right. And whenever I think about, yeah, and whenever I like to think about, immigration also, and especially in France, I always like to think about this guy, the guy who did this. If you remember the guy from Mali who you saw this, the guy climbing up the building.
Oh, yeah, 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 of course, and it was
Yeah,
granted
they gave
citizenship,
this
okay.
guy citizenship, and then of course he got hired by the fire department, which is the perfect job for him.
Yeah.
How
No,
many people could do this period? I mean, look at this.
I know, that's pretty impressive.
Climb up the
Pretty
side of a
impressive, and
building. You gotta be in tremendous shape to do that.
yeah,
I mean, is it fair to say
yeah,
that most Europeans are too damn lazy to do something like that?
yeah. I don't think it's a question of laziness. I mean, I think it's kind of defying gravity and all physics in
I mean,
general.
you wouldn't be able to do that if you're fat is what I'm saying.
I
I mean,
wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be
yeah,
able to do that if I was skinny either. I mean, that
yeah,
was a really impressive and athletic thing he did. And
yeah,
we and that's the thing in France. Everyone saw him as a hero, and you didn't have the very, like, some of the things that I'm seeing in other parts of the world discussing immigration. You didn't have like a lot of the racist narrative, or a lot of the he should be helping kids back in Mali
yeah,
and things like that. No, I mean, when we all can work together,
yeah.
we can create a beautiful society.
Oh, yeah.
It's just you got to make sure that you create the right incentives.
And, also, is it fair to say, though, that even though he still has some basic humanity in him that probably most would have, I mean, he saw a baby in serious trouble, and he did what he thought he could do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he cared. I mean, I think he would have done it if it was a French baby or a Norwegian baby or a Kenyan baby or a or a Chilean baby or a Chinese baby. Just, it's
He showed some human,
yeah,
amazing skill and amazing
yeah.
value right there.
I do like to. Occasionally sell that on Twitter. Okay, for all you people complaining about immigrants, here you go. It's a.
Mm.
I mean, I think there's something, because sometimes I think immigrants remind us of, yeah, there are places that are worse than we do. People are doing worse than we are. I mean,
Most of the world is doing worse than where the United States
yeah.
is.
What's
And
yeah?
that,
What
I
else?
think that's made the American general public a little bit ignorant of what happens in the world, not because they don't watch the news or anything, but just because they don't realize real hardships in the world. And they they very superficially,
Yeah.
analyze things.
I mean, the poorest Americans are better off than a lot of people around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, Americans like to go into this histrionics and says, "It's not immigration, it's an invasion." I said, "Do you know what an invasion really looks like?"
Right. Right.
Yeah, an invasion is when, an invasion happened in France in 1940 when tanks and soldiers are crossing your border. Not
Yeah.
when you have some ragtag immigrants who have nothing but the clothes on their back coming into your country who have almost nothing. It's
I mean, what kind of invasion are we talking about? They're coming here and they're picking strawberries for.
yeah,
I mean, they're coming to America and they're picking strawberries for Americans. What kind of invasion is that? I wish that's what the Nazis had done back in 1941 or 1939. You know, unfortunately, again, this immigration is a real serious issue in Europe because of the proximity of North Africa and of the Middle East.
Yeah,
The same cannot be said everywhere.
most certainly. I mean, I'm curious. It seems as though, the more I study history, the more I realize the French Revolution really had an impact on a lot of history, and in some cases, not for the better. Is that fair to say? And I'm not blaming France for that. I'm just saying it led to a series of events that were otherwise didn't.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that because, you after the French Revolution, you ended up with, the massive guillotine, or the wave of guillotines in the 1790s. And then you had Napoleon and you had a lot of chaos. But I think it's fair to say that long term, it was absolutely a net positive because
Yeah,
without the French Revolution, you wouldn't have had the wave of Republican slash democratic movements that swept through Europe in the 19th century, which also eventually translated into the British Empire, also kind of democratizing
yeah,
itself. And if all of that had not happened, today there would be no America. Not big. I know that the American War of Independence took place before the French Revolution, but I
and
don't
yeah,
think America would have been able to survive that much longer if there was a hostile absolutist Europe that was just waiting for its moment to go back and eat off the crumbs that was left
that's
of
a good point. But also, the I was also referring, how the French nationalism in some respects inspired the Italian and the German nationalism at a time when those were not really unified countries, not to mention certainly the
Mhm.
Bolsheviks looked to the French Revolution for a lot of inspiration. I mean,
They did.
but maybe you are correct about that. It's not to mention people like Saint Simon and Rousseau, God help us all. Uh,
You
yeah,
know, you can't control how some movements far away are going to be inspired by what you seek to accomplish. But what you can do is judge it how it what happened to France. And France was able to build a republic where the idea of a republic itself is almost godlike. And I'm not talking about statism or anything like that, but I mean in France, it's really interesting to see how the idea of a republic, which means a constitution-based state with no ruler, with no absolutist ruler, that concept has been
yeah.
personified into the Marianne, the woman with the Phrygian hat. It's been you have statues of that concept, and it's really interesting and really powerful to feel that. In school, you learn about what it means to be a republic, which I know you don't go through that in America.
It's hard to say what we don't go through here, but yes, it's very very interesting. But Americans don't really know that much about history like other people do.
Oh, well, in France, I mean, libertarian movements really originally I think they come from France. Maybe, I mean, if you go back to ancient China, that's also the case. But a lot of the original French philosophical leaders of the 19th century, like Bastiat,
Yes,
or
Yeah, definitely.
Jean-Baptiste Say, they were great
John
libertarians. And
Baptist said, yeah, there were some yeah, we did get some great libertarians out of France. Probably as many, probably not quite as many as England, but a lot of good people there out of France, definitely.
and that movement, the thing is, in France, France was very much impacted by World War II and by a lot of different, by the Cold War and its own very nationalistic perspective during the Cold War. France pulled out of NATO, or rather the NATO command under Charles de Gaulle, but and it had to deal with its own internal communistic factions. But despite all that, a lot of the French society has remained libertarian, even though the term libertarian is not a known term in France. In France, we
Yes.
use the term liberal, which is not the same thing as the American liberal, which in America, liberal has become associated with just left wing politics. In Europe, especially in France, the term liberal is used to describe someone who believes in free markets and also more social freedoms. Now, it's also known as centrism in France, right? Neither left or
Yes.
right, so centrism. And and you know what? President Emmanuel Macron, that's a libertarian. That's as close to libertarianism as you're going to get in Europe today.
Yeah, and of course, let's also keep in mind de Tocqueville. I mean, de Tocqueville had some great
Yeah.
things to
Yep.
say.
Yep.
Yeah, there's been a lot of good. I mean, I think Jefferson, of course, Jefferson knew French. I think it's certainly yeah. You're right though. Maybe we wouldn't have survived without French Revolution. I never really looked at it that way, but I appreciate you bringing that up. Uh, well, I think we got a good view on what's going on in France here, and certainly told us enough about the international alliance of libertarian parties. So, is there anything else you want to say before we go?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's very important to have discussions with libertarians, and I would I know you've done that before, and I would keep
Oh yes,
encourage you to do that because it's so important to realize to show to the American libertarian public how different libertarianism can be somewhere else, and not necessarily in terms of policy, but in terms of attitude and rhetoric and understanding of their role in history, and that's very important. And thank you so much for doing all of that.
yeah, certainly. There's a lot of viewpoints out there. Well, anyway, where can we find you out there?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna be in
I mean, on
France.
on the web and that's kind of
Oh,
thing.
on the web. So I mean, I'm on X and I'm on Facebook. I'm on X as Alexandre Crevaux
Yeah,
Asatiani, and yeah, I mean, anyone's always free to send me a message.
yeah.
If they want to see how they can build a libertarian movement in their home country.
Yes, it's certainly good to build a libertarian movement in the home countries. We need
Yeah.
some places out there. I should ask you what are some of the more active libertarian circles besides America and say Argentina? What are some places that are looking pretty good right now?
Well, okay, that's a good question. I mean, looking good is one thing, but if the movement looking good is, you have a lot of examples. Whether it's looking good for the country itself, that's different. I'm gonna give you the examples that I personally really know well about. I mean, in Georgia, for example, the Girchi Party, the
Yeah.
Libertarian Party of Georgia, has they had members elected into parliament. They managed to get marijuana legalized. They managed to help 50,000 kids evade military conscription. They've been champions of civil disobedience, and I think that's something that the American Party should learn more about.
Mhm.
Also there's a you know before the war began in Ukraine, Zelensky's party was the Libertarian Party of Ukraine. Servant of the People is still a Libertarian party in its ideology. It's just that now ideologies are kind of out of the window during the war. But it kind of showed that
Yeah.
the Ukrainian public at large was really ready before the war for a real libertarian
Well,
society.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
One thing I'd want to say about Saccart Velo is I think they have as many women or possibly more women than men in their libertarian movement, at least based on what I saw at the seminar. And not to mention the guy from the Ayn Rand Center, Armenia. He had one picture where there were 16 females and 8 males. I
Yeah.
couldn't believe it. I said, "Yeah."
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they're doing some great
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. In Georgia, in all of those former Soviet
Yeah.
republics, liberty is very popular in the youth
Yeah.
of all genders, and the reason why I think is because it's a lot less sectarian compared to the American libertarian movements, where they,
Well,
mm,
there's
it can get weird in the American libertarian movement. Let's be honest about
you
it.
have less sectarianism in smaller countries, but also I think they were inoculated against communism. Anyway, that's all for now. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, check out my Substack, go buy my novel Escape from Village, and go to buy me a coffee to support the show. I'm Chris Baker. Thank you, Alexandre Crevaux. We are out.
Thank you, Chris.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.